So for everyone online, I think we're going to wait maybe 2 or 3 minutes just because MA1 are just the other side of the campus, well not the campus, of the building, and they're going to be coming over from another lecture. So we'll probably start at, I'm going to say 1:05, so just hang in there for 2 minutes.
Hello, for anyone on YouTube live stream or recording, we're just giving a couple of minutes whilst we get some more students, and we'll be starting in 2 minutes if you want to fast forward. And where Richard will be introducing Madelaine Dowd to you, so just hold on a minute. Great, welcome to SDTV.
Hello, yes, welcome from South Kensington and from, I'm not sure where you are, Maddie, but from, hi. I think we're going to have some more people coming through, so apologies if there's a sort of sudden sort of like small stampede in a second. But yeah, very exciting today. Madelaine Dowd, who is affiliated with the RCA in all kinds of ways, simultaneously working on a brilliant project on Nature's Way with Chan, who is somewhere in the background there, I think. A graduate UX and information design. Is that
information experience design, yeah.
So, okay, yeah. So graduate and then also a designer and practitioner in multiple fields. And yeah, about 5 minutes ago, I was saying to Maddie, what are you actually going to talk about? Because I realized there was so many different elements of her work that she might be talking about today. But this session is going to be about her work in disaster situations. So looking at emergency response moments and what design can do in that situation. And I think looking at how that talks to people who are designing in that moment and in that mode, but also what that means for using those skills in broader design work as well. Hello. I've sort of trailed your entrance already, so you're anticipated. And I think, I mean, this is particularly timely. There's a few people in the room, maybe more people online who are looking at the role that designers, specifically service design, can play in a crisis like the refugee crisis from Ukraine. Students are working on that at the moment. So I think it's a particularly sort of timely topic to be exploring. Pull that floor out.
I might put it on mute whilst the talk's going on, because
perfect. And I'm going to hand over to Maddy. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
No, thank you very much for having me. And I'm aware that there are a few people in the room that, yes, I am working with and have worked with. So it's nice to know there are some familiar faces in here. But I will share my screen and get this started. So hopefully you can all see that screen. So yeah, I can see some thumbs. That's fine. Great. So today I wanted to give you a bit of context as to what I do. As Richard said, I've got quite a strange and diverse background that brings me into really weird and wonderful projects, which has been something that I've kind of curated and molded to the career that I really wanted to pursue. So I started in a world of architecture, and from the age of about 14 was working in architects' offices, looking at that built environment and starting to understand the impact that design can have to people and the way that they function in spaces and the importance of that. So I'm sure that plenty of you have gone from campus to campus at the RCA, and you've definitely got your favorite ones, and there are different ways that you work in those spaces and things like that. That's what started to get me interested in the design world. So whilst I was studying at UAL in interior and spatial design, I was brought in on a brief to look at tsunami escape routes. So being brought up in England, my experience of disasters has been very limited in terms of kind of natural disasters. There were minimal threats on that one, except from the likes of flooding. So it was a really new area for me to be brought into. And after working in these very commercial properties, doing office design for Disney, putting a racetrack in, because everyone gets excited about that. No one knows why. But I was brought into this project, and for me, that was a real changing moment. So it was where my perspective on what design can do and what a designer's responsibility really, really changed for me. And so I looked at other opportunities following that to do with disasters. So working with the likes of Foster and Partners and helping them winterize shelters in Syria. And then working with the likes of a charity called ICOMOS and developing a disaster preparedness committee. So that's looking at architectural heritage and how we can develop systems to potentially protect them in the case of disasters. And then whilst I was going through the process of my master's, I was looking at opportunities where I can bring these skill sets that I'd learned from the research that I'd done over in Japan on these other projects in to a new area. So I'll go into a bit more detail about that, as that's where I found Helm Innovation, which was a product of my master's degree and something that I carried into Innovation RCA. And I'm aware that some of you have been coming out of a lecture that's been to do with business today, I think. But either way, if you don't know about Innovation RCA, I'll tell you a bit more about it later. But get on your phones, get on the internet, start Googling it, please. But at the moment, I am working with Tian-san as a project coordinator and manager on the Nature's Way project, which is a COVID research project looking to help communities in a post-COVID world, which now we're all very critical of what post-COVID is. But I'm also working with the Helen Hamlin Centre on a few projects to do with the future of sport and looking at facilities within London, as well as being brought in to be a board member of the Institute of Post-Disaster Recovery. So as you can tell, I kind of like doing lots of things at the same time. And I feel like for me, it's really important to be challenging myself as a practitioner at different levels. So Helm Innovation itself is something that I run as the CEO, and we've got our first patent. And now we're looking at licensing the product and hopefully coming to an agreement very soon. And the Cross Design Studio, I get approached by lots of young startups and practitioners and organizations who look to work with me to either get their products to the first round of investment or to just jump in on a project and help out, whether it's to do with design, business or strategy. So that's something that is always there for me to be able to help and support other businesses that I feel like need that extra push. So we work as a collaborative space with lots of different practitioners that we pull in for different projects to enable us to work on these different projects. And then, as I said, working as project coordinator here, as well as a design researcher. So I am going to share a video with you. I think it's really important that you understand the motivations for why I do the work that I do. This video is distressing. It is a video of the tsunami over in Japan, and it's one of the case study areas that I worked in. This video, you don't see any harm come to people, but you can hear the screams, and I want you to make the decision whether you want to see this or not. You're more than welcome to leave the room. The video is a minute long. And if you're online, you're more than welcome to mute and close the screen if you need to, but please feel free to step away if you're uncomfortable with seeing this. So that was my first case study. So at the age of, I think, about 19, I was taken over to Japan on this collaborative project with UAL and Future Lab Tohoku to look at this area and to see what could have been done differently. So in that top right-hand picture, that big white building, that's Hotel Horaikan, which the owner of that hotel is the one who shared that video with me, an amazing woman called Akiko. So she is down there in that picture as well with that little orange bag, carrying one of those guests to try and get to that safe route. And she even dived back in to grab one of the guests that did get taken away in that wave, and amazingly, miraculously survived and managed to get that guest to safety too. So she is an absolute oracle within that area and an amazing woman who has really helped that community come together and help people rebuild after that disaster. But that video, as you can tell in my voice, it haunts me. It absolutely haunts me, because anyone who visited that hotel, as soon as they'd checked in, they'd be taken to another room and shown this video as a reminder that they were on that bay, and that water that is a beautiful view from their hotel window, it can be a huge threat. And it was a reminder that if they say to get out of the hotel, if they say leave, you leave. But that sound And within the Japanese architecture with the very thin walls, it just went through the whole building. So there'd be a certain time of day where you'd start to hear those screams again, which for me is something that will never go. It's something that will always motivate me to have an impact, and with this information to carry it and do something. So whilst I was there for I think about 2 months, working with a team of tutors from UAL as well as some other designers. And collectively, we were asked to look at developing structures or safe spaces when a disaster occurs again. But what we found was that 20,000 people died from the tsunami, yes, but 30,000 committed suicide following that. And those numbers again really resonate with me, like going back to the fact that I sat within an architecture world and you knew the impact you were having with those buildings. What was going wrong at this point for that built environment to have such an impact on people? And what you see here, these were the units that were given, which obviously these were 5 years later. Some of them were in use and some of them weren't, but you can get a basic understanding of what that infrastructure was that was in place and implemented after. And it's haunting that these spaces existed in this form. They were known to be coffins. That's how they were described because of the amount of suicides that happened within them. But also going back to that sound, the walls were so thin that there were stories of people who would go back to their rooms and hear crying from room to room, resonating through these corridors of buildings. So it made me start to look into this post-disaster structure, looking at what kind of interventions take place and at different scales. So hopefully most of you should be familiar with this building down at South Bank. This is another example of a post-disaster structure. So this was a collaboration with Anish Kapoor, and it was a inflatable space that was intended to be some sort of concert space where communities could come together, but this structure, it would be moved around from area to area. And then we have Home for All, which was a permanent structure put in place in Japan. And it was supposed to be a space to remind people what happened and to hold the memories of those people that were lost. But what do these projects have in common? So what I found was that a lot of them were actually dismissed by the local people. And lots of people saw them as these architectural interventions that were glorifying an artist or a designer themselves, as opposed to really looking at the needs of that community. So on the right-hand side, Home for All, that building, I spoke with some of the locals and they said that the woman who had offered to live in that building, maintain it and look after it, became depressed because it was only tourists that would visit. The locals wouldn't use it as a space. And it became this monument that sat more as an art piece as opposed to being functional in supporting that community. So as a very young designer, trying to take on all of this information and feeling such a responsibility, we, as a team, developed this concept where it was looking at creating these flexible spaces in which we'd work with communities to create safe points, which could be used as viewpoints, and it'd be a nature walk that was there in case a disaster happened, and it would be able to shelter all of the local people. So the things we were looking at, we're trying to really integrate this as a space that the community could really take ownership of. So we were able to kind of give a basic infrastructure or a basic blueprint and say, right, this money should be spent on your local tradespeople to do this. This money should be spent on these materials, which are local, but potentially creating a new economy for that area as well, acknowledging that this project has way more potential for that community to thrive from, as opposed to it being just a poster project or just a beautiful looking thing. as well, whilst I was doing this project, I was doing interviews and taking on as much information as possible. And it wasn't something that I'd planned to turn into a dissertation or a big paper, but it ended up being a critical piece that I wrote about the psychological impact of post-disaster relief and looking at the charity structures. So having a very critical perspective on that, but also this started to open up questions to me as to why things were being done in the way they were. But also I was coming into the picture 5 years later. So what was happening before then that I'd already missed out on? So I decided that I wanted to go into a new culture and understand a different culture's perspective on how to approach disaster relief. So I just finished my BA doing that research in Japan, and the earthquakes started to happen over in Italy, and it happened over quite a few months where it just got worse and worse and worse. But I managed to get out there in September, and I was looking to see who was getting involved, because those early steps can really have an impact on how people can rebuild their lives, but also how they can reground themselves. So I wanted to see how it was being approached over here. So as you can see, this area is Pescara del Tronto, which it was really heavily publicized. So loads of images of this village, which this is pretty much the whole village that you can see in that left-hand picture, but it just got flattened. And a couple of months later, somehow it got flattened even further by more earthquakes. And then in this image here, you can see Amatrice, which that top right-hand picture there, we were told by the local firemen that that building was the school. That was the sports centre, which was designed to house the community in the case of earthquakes, which raised real questions about the way properties are built over in Italy. And the word mafia was raised in conversation, but that's something that I'll save for another conversation another day. But you can see the problems here. Those places that were supposed to be safe could have really put lives in danger. But this was what was being communicated. So this is just one of the cases. But I started to get a real frustration with how these people's stories were being communicated, and the fact that there was this dehumanizing of people within disasters. It just became a whole community, a whole area. It didn't reflect the people within that had suffered, or the people who had survived. And the depiction, things like this, such bad taste. So I wanted to start to understand from the people who had survived these disasters. I wanted to understand what we could learn from them. So the group of people that we've got here, they were sharing their stories of a earthquake that had happened years before, and were giving perspectives on how they had come through, and they've managed to rebuild their lives starting from the rubble, so to speak. So you have the owners of a restaurant, Janie and Leonardo, up in the top right-hand corner. And then you have the mayor of Fontecchio, and then you have the architect from L'Aquila, and then a woman who was part of the community that built their own self-sustaining eco-village. So these people were all having impacts in different ways within their communities, but their stories, they were so empowering. But for me, it was also really important that that information, it was very cultural. It was very specific to them as a community. And that's what I felt I was lacking as someone from the outside, framing a disaster, me trying to take information and to digest that to create something. Maybe I needed to take a step back and find a way to share their voices. And it raised that question of how you can get people to listen. So being sat within my master's course of information experience design, I was looking at the ethics of what's being communicated. as you're aware, me even sharing that video at the beginning, I want to make sure that ethically everyone's given the opportunity to tap out when they need to for their own well-being. With information like this as well, I feel that there's an importance for it to be shared, but also making sure that we're framing the information responsibly, because as a creative, that's what you're doing, especially within communication. So how can we be doing this in a sensitive and ethical way where we can start to look at building empathy? So empathy really started to resonate with me as I realized how much of an empathic person I am. It's part of what drives me in my work, meeting all of these people. And I wanted to see if I could try and build this sense of empathy for people to understand why it's so important that designers have a place in situations like this and a responsibility to do good for the communities as well as the audiences, and getting them to understand what those people have gone through, but what we can actively do to support them. So I developed this app, which was with a guy called Jack Wild, who was on course with me. And what we looked at doing was, with all those interviews that we had from those people, we looked at creating this information system where you could start at the epicenter, so from that earthquake itself, and navigate your way out through these conversation streams. So you could follow a path about policy to understand what policies they were faced with at different points, or maybe even just how to get out of an area, but to take you out through these conversations to the current day, but making sure that that voice, it was their stories. And the idea was that this would be a communication system that, with further altering, could potentially be given back to those people who had just come through the earthquakes themselves, to then gain that cultural information to understand what they can do to rebuild. And then we were looking at it from the other perspective, how we can share those stories as well with a new audience. So the likes of myself, who had never been in a natural disaster before, how could I experience that information as authentically as possible? So again, we looked at this interactive system, which you can see on that little tablet that the boy's using, and he's got headphones on as well. So we were looking at creating this multimodal experience where we can get you to engage at different steps, but also being really aware of things like the attention economy. So if we can get you to tap into putting those headphones on, we've got you for a bit extra time. If we get you to pick up that app, we've got you a bit longer. If we can get you to start engaging and realize you have to start and interact for things to navigate their way through, it's that kind of gamification aspect where we can pull you in step by step. So that was something that we experimented with. And we found that it was a successful way of getting people to create their own narratives of a disaster. So part of it is kind of investigating for them to build their own personal experience to allow empathy to form. So that was something that we really, really stuck to. And it's something that I brought these experiments together to build this paper, looking at developing a deeper sense of empathy through the way we communicate these disasters. And it ended up being my final paper, which, yes, I got it to 10,000 words on the dot. And yes, I absolutely put that extra word in on purpose. But this paper, it brought together all of these examples of how we can be communicating disasters better, and how we can look at removing that victimhood exploitation from media systems, and how we can allow people to take pride in what they've managed to survive, what they've managed to go through, because those people are the ones that are empowering the people around them to thrive. And this paper was something that got picked up by the BBC R&D lab. And that was from an exhibition that I did over at White City a good few years ago now. That if you're looking at your final exhibition at the moment and wondering how important it is. Oh, it is. There are some amazing people that come to these exhibitions, so be aware of that. But no, I met an amazing man called Bill Thompson, who we've worked together and have plenty of discussions, but this was where it started. Which then brings me back to the RCA. So the RCA, as I said, was an opportunity for me to delve further into my disaster research, and those different briefs that they present to you, I always found a way of tweaking it and making sure that it was a way for me to challenge my disaster design theories. So Design for Safety at Sea was an across RCA project, and it was with the Lloyd's Register Foundation, and the RNLI were involved as well. But it was looking at safety at sea within this really small thing that happens that's so fundamental, that it's to do with pilots moving from ship to ship. So here you can see this smaller ship in front. That ship goes right alongside this huge ship, and the pilot has to climb up the side to get on board to then bring these ships into port, which here looks nice and calm, absolutely fine. However, this happens all over the world in different conditions. So whether it's stormy, freezing cold, really hot, but also they're presented with situations like this, which these climbs can be up to 10 meters long along the side of a ship. And you have the swelling of boats too. So these pilots have got to navigate jumping onto this ladder to climb up onto the ship, with all of these different elements going on around them, as well as cases like this. So the challenge was for us to approach this and try and find a solution in 2 weeks. So the things that we started with looking at were things like the stability, durability, but something that ended up being our focus was the rigging. So we started to look at creating a rigging solution and develop this as a team. So we've got Mikkel, Andy and Sarah. We all worked together on this project, and we ended up winning an award from the Lloyd's Register Foundation. So winning the Most Immediate Life-Saving Impact Award, which was great with this concept. And then we got asked to turn it into a business. We got asked to take it further and further. So it went from 2 weeks to 2 months to 2 years. And during that, there was another project that we worked with called DynaWeb. They were one of the other competing projects at the time, and they won Best Innovation within the same competition. And one of the leads of their project came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in taking both of the projects to Innovation RCA and running it as CEO. And it never really crossed my mind that I could do that, that I could just start a company with something that I'd designed, which sounds ridiculous even to me now. But I thought, okay, let's give this a go. It's a new opportunity, and the potential impact that we could be having. Hundreds and thousands of people that go through this process daily around the world, going ship to ship to keep our economy running smoothly, but all of those lives potentially at risk too. This for me felt like a really fulfilling opportunity where I'd be able to potentially bring something into the world that can help these people. So that sense of responsibility kicked in, and Helm Innovation was created. And initially a guy called Marcus joined the project, and the two of us sat running it, but unfortunately he had to go back to Taiwan to take care of his family after illness. So I was sat there on my own with this business, and I didn't have a clue where to start. My background is not business, but that's where Innovation RCA came in for me. So I worked with them for about a year in developing the business and understanding what it is to be a business, which there are lots of things to it, which, as I said, please make yourself aware of Innovation RCA. It's a great asset for all of you, not just product design. So please do check them out. But since then, we've been going on to win awards, and I got brought into one of the Innovate UK awards for Young Innovator of the Year, and have gained some really amazing mentorship to be able to develop this concept, this 2-week concept from the RCA into a business in which we have our patent, and we're looking to secure our licensing agreement later this year with one of the best and leading global distributors and manufacturers. So it's a very exciting year. But as I said, please, please, please do make yourself aware of Innovation RCA. So there are amazing workshops and different training series that they can offer you. And even if you need to have a conversation with them, if you're unsure of what you're exhibiting. So I come into the RCA to do talks about IP and protecting your idea, but also understanding the value of what you're creating. And all of you will be creating, I'm sure, amazing innovative projects. So please be aware of the term intellectual property to start, but also please do have a look on their website, have a look at anything that they have for you to access, whether it's videos, because as soon as you're putting your ideas out into the real world, you're putting them in danger of other people taking them. So please, please, please do be aware of that. And also, if you're, I'm not sure what year group I've got in here, but for anyone who is interested in going into pursuing startups, you're in a really great place. Being at university, you've already got a great infrastructure around you, but there are lots of other opportunities that if you decide later on down the line that you want to go back to an idea, places like this are there to support you. And they're very much focused on projects that are about sustainability, looking at helping communities, health and safety, those kinds of things. So please do check them out and have a look. But otherwise, I think that's as much as I can squeeze in there for now. So thank you everyone for listening, and please do find me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions that you're not brave enough to ask now, or if you want to find out anything more about me, I'll put the websites in the chat. But for now, thank you very much for patiently listening.
Nice. Brilliant, Maddie. Thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. And what's brilliant as well is I have absolutely no idea what questions people might ask, because it could be almost about anything, which is the sort of a really inspiring talk, I think. I might start with, actually, I'm going to, because what I loved about it was that it went from sort of very abstract to very practical and sort of back again. So I might start with sort of something slightly more esoteric. And that's when you were talking about, you said something really interesting about getting people to empathize and sort of see a disaster situation from a new light. And there was something about being embodied, or sort of seeing it or experiencing it with their bodies, and that changing how people related to it. I mean, yeah, could you explain more about how that happened, or examples of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for any of you that have access to the RCA system as well, you're able, I think, to even have a look at that paper. So I think it's listed on the RCA archive, Synthetic Empathy. But yeah, so we found that getting people to have a sense of experience, an actual experience of a disaster, problematic in terms of trying to communicate that disaster. So finding different ways where we can present opportunities for people to go in step by step, further and further, to engage with that information. That was something that I became really interested in after having a background in doing things like exhibition design and installation design, which involve that interaction. But it's giving people that opt-out opportunity. But creating those different steps was really, really important in understanding a full rounded experience of that disaster and someone building a full picture. So having that audio, they could get something different from that audio than they would that physical interface. And to create this kind of full tapestry of an experience that they have investigated, they've created that narrative and they've gained different bits of information at different points. That was found to be really, really key. So it not just being focused on, here's that one picture, here's that one bit of information. It's a longer experience. That was something that we found was really successful. But the ethics of that, we had to be very, very careful on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because so often disasters are captured by an image, and there's often an image that people associate with a particular disaster, and that can be really helpful, but also I guess it can sort of limit how people see that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it can become like the branding of a disaster. And that's something that I think is quite common where we're looking at disasters from other countries. There are certain images that we're presented by the different media streams, which they become known as kind of the tokens of that disaster, where the likes of social media can share different things. But it can also create a really distancing effect, where if that information is too heavy, too hard, and in the wrong place, you just will dismiss it because you're not going to throw yourself into uncomfortable situations. So that process of getting people to want to engage in that information, it's starting from a place of empowerment, and those people who were stunning people, that they were proud of who they were and what they've achieved. That was the key for it all, I think.
So, I'd like to throw it open to questions from the sort of floor and from online.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciated this. I found it very inspiring and really cool to see like the ethos-driven thread that kind of seems to inform your work. Which leads me to wonder, are there any practices you do to maintain a sense of self-care when you're dealing with such heavy content, and how you kind of calibrate that when working with such intense subject matters?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And it's something that I'm trying to be better at every day. Because you're right, it's something that it could be such a heavy weight to have on you, that information. But as a creative, that expectation to solve, which especially as an early stage designer at university, I wasn't necessarily in a position to be able to create those things. So for me, I saw Helm Innovation, the business that I created, I saw that as an opportunity to potentially go back through that mental tick list of people that have helped me, to be able to one day go back and help them. So that gave me a real drive to support, but that's not necessarily well-being. That's me, I guess, trying to check in on myself as to my expectations and how I can use those to help my career thrive. However, on a personal level, when I'm on site, I have to say something in me, I can kind of switch where it is very much about what happened here. It's not for me to get emotional about what's happened because I wasn't there. It's in that situation misdirected and almost, I feel, inappropriate for me to get upset. I channel that into creating something. And once I've created something or supported or finished, that's where I can get that sense of relief. So till then, I think I'll be trying yoga. I'll be trying to go running, and I will try my best to eat healthily. But it's the career path that I've chosen, and it's, to me, it really is more than a job. It's something that I will try my best as a designer to have an impact in the world. But for me, reflection is so important, where I celebrate those little wins, and they really, really mean the world to me. So getting people ringing me up and saying, oh, we've managed to finally sort out the church being rebuilt. Thanks for helping on this part. It's like, yay, absolutely. And it is so empowering to know that you can make those differences, yes, but it's that passing over and watching other people succeed. They're my little wins. So yeah, it's possibly not the best well-being speech, but if it's something that anyone else is looking into and can give me better ways of approaching well-being, please get in contact.
I have a question about, while we were talking about like disaster being such a heavy topic and local people who've just gotten out of that tragedy, as a designer, when you're trying to engage these local people again into creating something new, do you have any advice on how do you like reach out, or like what are these tips to get them involved without making the experience very hard on them or traumatic, just to like kind of reopen those wounds and try talking about the disaster again and again, just for the benefit of a project? What would be your tips on those?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's a great question. And it's something that those two main projects, the Japan and Italy projects, they were very long term. And a lot of that time was spent developing relationships with the right people in the communities. So even when I got onto that Japan project, that was after I think about 5 years of the tutors already setting up these relationships with local suppliers, businesses that were interested in investing in that community to help them. So they wanted to see change and they wanted to have some inspiration as to how that could happen. So it was a case of knowing the right people that already wanted that change in the community to then support them. It wasn't you coming in and intervening. It was you coming in, listening to them to then hand this over. Because one of the issues with the likes of the Red Cross and other companies like such, they're regarded as competitive. So it's who gets on site first to be in those publicity pieces and who gets seen in the media as supporting. And it is so problematic, and it's why in lots of cases post-disaster relief is actually declined and refused in certain areas. And it's not just in the likes of Japan, it's all around the world. There are people who can see through it and they know that those systems that are being brought in, they're not considered enough and they have a negative impact. Going back to that number, 30,000 that committed suicide as a result of the living situation that they were in. Yes, the incident that happened, but that long-term relationship, if you can tap into local people that already want that change, look at those people advocating it in the area and people who are looking for that outreach, they're the people to support, work with, who will help you thrive with these projects. But they're the ones that can also look to maintain it, because you can bring in an intervention, then going back to Home for All, that then just sat there, which this poor person living there that is suffering from it, what could have been done differently if the right person was given it to promote it or change it in a different way? That person, there's a lot of power in that leader. And yeah, that's my advice on that one. See, it's always a long-term engagement, however you look at it with disasters.
Thank you so much, Madelaine, for sharing. It's a very, very inspiring experience to kind of dedicate all of your effort to such a meaningful and impactful career. So my question is more around kind of on the business side. So when it comes to, I guess, disaster prevention or management, do you see there's still kind of really strong business opportunity to actually make it a very independent and sustainable business, or is more of approaching this from a nonprofit kind of perspective?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on what angle you're approaching it, whether you are looking at that top down or bottom up. So looking at the policy level intervention, I think I probably sit closer to kind of grassroots disaster projects. So I'm working with a company called Atlantic Pacific, which they have the boat project, where they provide lifeboats in a container ship box and drop those at different places around the world where they don't have lifeboats. So that, for me, that's a charity, not a business, just to be clear. that for me, they're the kind of projects that I jump onto or choose to sit with at the moment, because I feel like the impact that could be had at that level, there's a lot that I can learn from that, which hopefully one day I can bring that into maybe policy level higher up. But disasters create amazing opportunities for innovation. And I think there was something said about wars being one of the biggest stimulants for creating new innovation, where that's something that people are aware of, yes. And if you choose where you sit within your business world, whether you want to look at helping people, planet, or if you want to succeed as a business, I think that's a choice you make within that disaster area. And I think the reason why a lot of people sit in charities when approaching human disasters, natural disasters, when it comes to the likes of safety, so Helm Innovation, that's a safety product. It's not for natural disasters. So that sitting as a business, it has a completely different infrastructure and way that it has to sit within that economy, and even just the maritime sector. It has to sit in a different way to be able to have an impact. So in terms of business and disasters, I think it completely depends on the product service approach that you want to take and ethically where you sit within that. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I feel like it was a critique of the question. So sorry.
No, absolutely. I'm just, I guess, wondering kind of how you might approach this so that it's not completely just depending on people's goodwill, but rather there might be opportunities where you can align that interest so that I guess you would have capital flowing into this area as well.
Yeah, well, I guess that's where you can look at the perspective of like cooperatives. And it is looking at that ownership element of who's benefiting and who's paying. So it's something that I'm looking at in another project at the moment, where you can potentially get people to be smarter with the financial decisions they make to be able to reinvest in their local communities, which structures like that as a business could potentially sit well within that area. I'm not sure if it's been done before, but maybe we've just come up with our own business. So maybe we should have a chat after. Otherwise, no, I think there are opportunities to challenge it, but it is taking that ownership back to the community, which that's something where I think there is potential for bringing business. But the likes of, I think it's mass architects, they look when they're creating these huge projects, whether it's like a new cancer lab that's being developed in an area, they look at bringing in those local tradespeople, communities, and it creates that new economic opportunity for that area. It is a full understanding of how to help that community to thrive again. So with that perspective, there is potential, I think, for businesses to do something, but the ownership of that, like the stakeholders within that, will be really key on how that sits, I think.
Thank you.
Questions in the room or pitches to Maddie to co-found a business with her? I could see there were, actually, Maddie, you could probably see the chat as clearly as so we can. So really, I'd love to know how you found opportunities and ways to keep engaging with the theme of safety throughout the years. In particular, how did you get people in the industries to engage in your work in such a wonderful way?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are lots of different ways for you to get noticed, especially whilst you are here at the RCA. They're really willing to promote you if you're putting yourself forward. And it's something that I always made an effort with. So I always made an effort to get in contact with the speakers who, if there was anyone that I was interested in their work, I'd make a point of saying, hi, thank you so much. I'd love to speak a little bit more and find out more about what you do, to get on people's radars. And through the years, I've been offered different opportunities. So going to Foster and Partners, I managed to at Christmas one year get a letter from the head of design at Foster and Partners inviting me to come and work with them. Bizarre, but best Christmas present ever. But that was because someone in my network knew that I was interested in working there and about this project. So it was very much just about me putting myself out there, because I described myself as a designer for disasters for a long time, and everyone went, what's that? And I think people still do, and that's fine. But the network of people that you develop over the years is really important. So the likes of the exhibition, making sure you're there, shaking hands and saying, hi, do you want me to tell you about this? It's really relevant. And if you're going to things like conferences, making sure that you're the person sat at the front row, you've always got a question to ask, and you make the effort to engage with those people for them to either remember you or for them to have you on their radar, whatever that is. But conferences, the likes of, there are different pitching sites you can go on. So you can, with your projects that you've got now, you could go to the likes of Innovate UK and you could go for grant funding to get further investment, or you could get business support. But these are ways of promoting you as an individual as much as it is about promoting you like your business. So Helm Innovation was an opportunity for me, yes, to secure a patent, a business, a product, income, but it was also a way for me to validate the fact that I can create something that can make an impact in the real world. And for people who may see me as young and naive, they can go, oh no, wow, she's actually done it. Fair play. Yeah, let's get her in. Which, it's being strategic with the choices that you make in the jobs that you take, as well as the people that you make an effort to go and see. Because it's you curating that next 10 years, that next 5 years. But you really have to just put yourself forward, put yourself out there, and be interested, because there are plenty of interesting people out there.
That's incredibly good advice, I'd say. We should record that bit and just play it in. That's very standard. Yeah. Any other questions from the room? I noticed everyone was sort of interested in the sort of conceptual and the sort of humanitarian aspects of the talk, and not about the sort of filthy lucre that can be made by founding your own business. And I don't know whether people want to explore that more, because Maddie has had this experience of not necessarily thinking that she was going to launch a company out of a student project, and then going through that. And some of you may not have that on your mind at all, but some of you might have it at the back of your mind. Any questions that come along that?
I'm interested in you being a CEO and your concept and your understanding of what a modern day design driven CEO might behave like versus the CEOs we hear about in the newspapers. But I'd love to hear your take on your life as a CEO.
Which I'd say, if you're interested in creative leadership, I hear there's a certain book coming out of the Helen Hamlin Centre, which you should definitely have a look at. But it's a really great question. And as I say, I'm not someone from a business background. So I think a lot of the ways that I approach business has been informed by just what I've learned over the years in terms of my practice. So there are choices that I've made which have been based on my principles as opposed to business principles, which haven't always worked out amazingly. But for me, that drive has always been to have the product out there in the real world and for it to help people and to prevent deaths. And if that's the impact I can be having, I will find the best way of doing that. So me being CEO of the company, there's this assumption that startups, you take investment and you just scale up really quickly, simple as that, get someone else on board, and it's just a business. Ta-da! For me, I really struggled with that concept. So I was brought into Innovation RCA and I won investment for 500k, which I ended up declining And if we're going back to that question about mental health, that was because mentally I wasn't in the right frame of mind to do that. I wasn't willing to take that money because I knew that was people's like life savings or their pensions that they were investing, expecting the money back. And I was petrified that I was going to be spending that on my own salary, and the business still might fail. And I couldn't take on that responsibility. So for my own mental health, that was something that I chose to decline. And as a result of that, if anything, that pressure, that weight was taken off. And I was grateful for all the support I got from Innovation RCA. But I said, this isn't the right environment for me. There were lots of really great businesses in there, but for me, it just didn't work. I knew that the industry was really slow, as in the maritime industry. It's ridiculously slow. It takes about 25 years for anything to change at a policy level. So I was pushing against something that was already going to take time. So why not accept it? Take a deep breath. And from that, I decided to kind of get other people involved in the company, get my engineer in, Josh Chibwick, who's amazing. And we work at the Cross Design Studio together, working on weird and wonderful briefs. But we both kind of took it at the pace that it came. But I also ended up finding Josh work at one point because the job at helm wasn't right for him. And I think that's what's so important as a leader of a project, that you're aware of your team and that you take responsibility for their welfare and that you really care, which I hope if all of you get something from today, it's that I actually really care about all of these projects and things that I go into. But if you expect that from your team, like treat people how you want to be treated. And that's something that's really key for me. But it meant that we were able to push the company at the right pace and that we were able to get things done at the right time. So it may not have been the quickest venture. And in terms of creative leadership, I think that's something where knowing the right time and being dynamic and also embracing failure, because I promise you there were lots of failures in between. I think that reflective position where you don't take it as defeat, that was really, really key. But I'm still learning. I have to say, I haven't got my book yet. Rama's getting one in for me. So I'll have a lot more to learn, I'm sure.
Thank you, Maddie.
Any more questions? I just have one just on the business side of things. So I think a lot of the businesses that go through Innovation RCA tend to have patents, and they tend often to come from other programs where it's more obviously defensible, isn't it? If you have a new material, a physical invention. I was just wondering, from your experience of doing it, talking to people who are in service design, who are working with more abstract things, have you got any advice or any, I mean, I'm sort of looking more for encouragement, but if not necessarily, I mean, if actually I'm being overly optimistic, tell me, but have you got any sort of advice in terms of if your ideas are something which is less based on a sort of physical intervention, how you might approach it?
Yeah, no, there's absolutely ways of protecting services. So some of the most successful businesses are services. Like, I don't need to preach this to you guys, with the likes of like Uber, Deliveroo, Airbnb, these kind of organizations, they've created amazing businesses from their services. So there are ways of protecting it. And if you have an idea and you're not sure whether it is protectable, you can go to Innovation RCA and speak to them. Say, I think I have something that's worth pursuing. How can I protect this? So whether it's protecting the brand itself or the way that systems work, there are ways of doing it. But if I haven't promoted them enough, Innovation RCA are an asset that's there for you, and they're available for you to use as much as you need. And they have amazing legal advice in there. But you're also able to have a look at their archive. So you can see all the businesses that have run through Innovation RCA. And there are services that have gone through there. There was one that was to do with, I think, child education, where it's not just this product base. So yes, you absolutely can protect your ideas, and please do it before you exhibit your work. but I'm sure the tutors can help advise on that too.
That's incredibly timely, isn't it? It's in about a month's time or something like that. Brilliant. That's another one to clip. Excellent. And there's a book, apparently, a book coming.
Oh, have you not heard of it? So creative
anymore.
Yeah. But yeah, no, absolutely. If you are looking at creative leadership as a role, please do have a look at the book, which is it's come from the director of the Helen Hamlin Centre, and has been based on research done by the team as well. So do have a look for that if it's something you're interested in.
Excellent.
It's Rama Girawa. Yeah.
Okay.
He'll come talk to us if he hasn't already.
Excellent. Cool. Any final questions? Anything? I've been given half an hour on the chat. I've been thrown at my own meeting, so do maybe can see anything else in the chat. Brilliant. Maddie, thank you so much. I know it was brilliant. Yeah. Excellent. And I guess you'll see these people sort of milling around in the studio at some point as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, good luck to everyone. I know this last month can be a bit stressful, but good luck. I look forward to seeing the exhibition.
Excellent. Cool. Well, thank you so much. And yeah.
Are you still the host, Richard, or not?
Yes. Thank you, everyone online.
Yes, thanks, everybody.
I'm not sure if we're still recording, Maddie, but thank you. That was so interesting and so inspiring as well. It's sort of touched on so many of the things that people are thinking about and either sort of worrying about or sort of hoping to do here. So yeah, that's really serendipitous. I don't know how we ended up with this date as well, but it seems to have sort of like connected both of the first years who are working on a lot of things around emergency relief, but also with the second years who are also thinking about what on earth am I going to do next. So yeah, it's perfect.
Oh no, I'm glad to help.
Brilliant. And at some point as well, like John and I were talking about this problem about how does design intervene in a moment of like lots of action and crisis and things, and we know very, very little about it, but it's being asked to do this and feel like we're going to be asked to do it more. So yeah, at some point it'd be really cool just to sort of maybe have a bit more of a chat about that and sort of how we approach it.
Sorry, just going to jump in. Madelaine, you're now the host, so I don't know if you can see something that says stop recording.